So welcome everybody. My name is Dhamma Mega and I'm the publishing director at Windhorse Publications. And so tonight we're here to celebrate and to find out a bit about Prajnaketu's book, Cyberloka, A Buddhist Guide to Digital Life. And as you can see, he'll be in conversation with Maitreyabandhu tonight. And it's always a really great celebration. There's so much work goes into the creation of a book. And it's a really happy and satisfying day when we can, when we launch a new author and a first book. And if I know Prajnaketu at all, I'll wager it'll be the first of many. I hope so.
Let's try and stop me.
So before I introduce Prajnaketu and Maitreyabandhu, which might be an unnecessary activity, but a lovely one nonetheless, before I introduce you both, just to say a few practical things about tonight. Some of you are on Zoom and some of you are watching this on YouTube, either live or later. And we have about an hour and a half together in total, up to that much time. And I'm assuming most of you will not have read Prajnaketu's book yet. So actually, the bulk of the evening will be a conversation between Maitreyabandhu and Prajnaketu about the book, the topics, the stories, about writing, about digital life, about the mind, and of course about what these digital media mean for our Dharma lives and our lives as people. And all the way through, if you'd like to put any questions that you have, I'll bring the questions forward at the end of their conversation. So if you've got any questions, just type them in the chat, either to me or to everyone. And perhaps you don't have exactly a question. But if you'd like to put a comment or some reflections or something that it's made you think about this conversation, then please do include that as well. Maitreyabandhu is a very busy man, particularly tonight. So he's going to leave at the end of the kind of conversation. And so Prajnaketu and I will be looking at your questions and we'll have a bit of time together. We're going to do it in that way because the video will be saved afterwards on YouTube and will be made public. So rather than have lots of people coming backwards and forwards, we'll just have us on screen. Yes, so I'm really pleased you made it tonight. Prajnaketu actually was born not very far away from where I am now, on the south coast of England. He was born in Southampton and at the age of 16 discovered meditation and became fascinated with it. And it wasn't until he was studying at Oxford Maths and Philosophy that you got a real interest in Buddhism per se, Prajnaketu, and you took to it, shall we say. And I think your study of maths and philosophy says something about your mind and the qualities of your clarity and your thoughtfulness, and how lucid and engaging you are in the book. And yeah, so, and I think your name given to you at ordination, Prajnaketu was ordained in 2014, and your name means he who holds a lamp of wisdom. And now you're, well, actually quite recently, the director of the Urging Sangharakshita Trust and a literary executor. And you'll see those lovely complete works volumes behind you. Yeah. And yeah, so I've had the pleasure of getting to know you a bit in all of those roles over the last 2 years, which I've very much valued. And tonight you'll be in conversation with Maitreyabandhu, who is a wonderful interviewer. So I'm very much looking forward to that. Maitreyabandhu, as you may know, has written 3 books on Buddhism, all of which are published by Windhorse Publications. You'll know these 2, Journey in the Guide and Life with Full Attention. And your 3rd book, Thicker Than Blood, I'm afraid I've given away again, so I can't wave it about. But you're also a poet and have published 2 pamphlets and 3 full-length volume collections of poetry, which is no mean feat to get poetry, to get a platform like that for poetry through Blood Axe Books. And of course, you founded Poetry East, where you've done many interviews with poets, writers, artists across the UK and beyond. And most recently, you've been doing the Nature of Mind project, hosting conversations with many very interesting thinkers, including Ian McGilchrist, Bernardo Kastrup, Amishi Jha, Penny Satori, and others. And you're a public preceptor, live at the LBC, and you're a long-standing order member, ordained in 1990. That's more than enough for me. I hope you enjoy the conversation together.
Thanks, Dhamma-Megha.
Thank you, Dhamma-Megha. That's great. Thank you. And really nice to see you all. Particularly nice to see you, Prajnaketu.
Yeah.
We've been chatting on the phone about our conversation today. And really lovely to receive my copy of Cyberloka, A Buddhist Guide to Digital Life. I hope you'll all be snapping it up and suggesting your friends buy it. It's a beautiful looking book. So I thought we'd just plunge in straight away with a slightly tricky question. Because, when I saw this and, A Buddhist Guide to Digital Life, I'm afraid the first thing I thought was, oh no, I'm going to be told off again for scrolling on my phone. Someone's going to tell me that I really shouldn't be spending so much time on the screen. Someone's going to be telling me off again. And I wondered whether a lot of people might feel that because everybody sort of knows that we're being sort of dragged into social media and so on. We're all sort of doing it in one way or another, I think. So I wanted to find out, first of all, are you telling us off? In which case, actually, I know you're not. But anyway, are you? But you see, that would be a main question, wouldn't it, for anyone looking at this book? Is it's going to be another book that tells them what they know they should do. They shouldn't really look at be on social media so much. They shouldn't be scrolling on Instagram. They shouldn't be on Snapchat. All that sort of stuff. If you're not careful, you can think this is a book telling me I shouldn't do that. I already know I shouldn't do that, but I probably won't stop. So I thought we'd start with that slightly pokey question.
Yeah, well, I think you've sort of answered it anyway, Maitreyabandhu. That's not the emphasis of the book at all. I actually don't think, as you say, it would be effective. And frankly, what kind of authority am I to even say that, to people? In fact, yeah, I sort of think, well, the direction I'm coming from very much is not, I'm not the Pope, I'm not sort of making judgments about what people do online or saying what we should and shouldn't do. Certainly, if you read the book at all, you will see that I'm hardly in a position to do that myself. I've had plenty of misadventures, and I think a lot of my reflections on what I'm referring to the Cyberloka as they come from a sense of, look, we're exploring this together. Yes, there are concerns, there are objective things that we need to be aware of. We shouldn't be naive about the sort of things that digital technology can throw up. And look, we're still working it out, aren't we? My hope is that, well, I know this from my own experience, that bringing Buddhist reflections to bear on this has helped me tremendously, and my hope is that will be the truth for my readers as well.
That's another thing I was a bit surprised by the book, is how personal it is. I was slightly expecting it to be, a sort of, here's a study on this, here's a study on that, and here's a good reason, and again, why not to do that? But one of the things that it arises out of, the book seems to arise out of, is your own personal experience of growing up with the internet. I wonder whether I hadn't meant to say this, but I wonder whether it might be good just to sketch in your own bit of your own biography of growing up with the internet, because I'm a bit too old for that. I actually predate the internet, which is amazing.
Yeah, like I do as well. I don't think I kind of grew up with 4 TV channels. Terrestrial TV. When I was about 11 or 12, my family first got their computer, which was very definitely offline. I don't think we made it online until my early teens. Certainly, I didn't get a phone until I was well into my teens. And that was a definitely not smartphone. It had real buttons, which wore off as I used them. And yeah, so in a way, my life has been. I remember wanting to look up something online and going to having to book to go to the library, to do that. So yeah, I think. Yeah, I'm part of this generation. Well, I know I'm part of this generation of, it's called the millennial generation, for better or for worse. That's my designation in life. And what that means is that, yeah, I've experienced what it's like to be bored and not have anything to do because the TV is rubbish. And I've got, you know what I mean? And also then just, okay, this explosion of information, possible connections with people, the potential for broadcasting myself. It's all of that has kind of developed in a way from my childhood through to my early adulthood. That's the way my life has played out, and I think partly that's why I'm able to speak from the sort of personal experience of trying this out, because that's kind of what kids do, don't they? They're often at the cutting edge of these technologies and new developments, and yeah, we make a real mess of it sometimes. We get really.
You even mentioned that you remember the dial-up tone. I mean, I'd forgotten about the dial-up, that dial-up tone that you used to wait for and then wait.
That beautiful song that told you were now online. Yeah.
So you're that old. I think I'm talking to a friend of mine who's 20, and it's again completely different if you're 20, and it'll be completely different again if you're 15 or 16. So let's roll into a bit more about the book. I mean, the first thing that you really explore is hyper-availability, and that is that's a new thing. So I thought let's be good to get your sense of hyper-availability. I mean, I suppose I come to this conversation with quite a lot of concerns about the online experience. I've got teenage children effectively, and I see Alex, who's 16. You watch her mood go down as she looks at her phone. It's very, very palpable and really rather worrying. So I come to this conversation a little bit like a parent worrying about young teenagers and what that's going to do. But before we get to that, let's start to talk a bit about what do you mean by hyper availability, and what was your experience of that, and let's go on from there, because that's the first thing you touch on, isn't it, really?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. So I mean, hyper availability is a word that I just coined for the purposes of this.
I thought it was a standard usage.
No, not that I'm aware of anyway. I think like a few things in the book, I've just made it up basically. But this particular word, the what I'm referring to with hyper availability, is the hyper availability of information. So the fact that we can obtain quickly just about like anything we want to find out. Like we've got more data than we know what to do with, really. So it's not just that we can sort of go down to our local bookshop and it's got a large selection. It's like several orders of magnitude more complex, richer, being produced at a rate which is impossible to keep up with. It's all of that that's what I mean by hyper availability. And I think this was something that struck me, particularly moving from a kind of or like kind of early web experiences to later web experiences, around music. I talk about my experience of that in the book, of just like, okay, how do I navigate this? How do I go from a situation where I'd have to go to a shop to buy a CD? No one even really knows about CDs. I wonder if your 20-year-old friend would even know what a CD is. You have to go and physically buy something like that, to being able to listen to the entire, like, not even Western musical canon, but like the world musical canon at a few clicks. So how do we navigate that? How do we choose what is worth listening to, what's not worth listening to? How do we ensure that we're not just skimming along the surface of our interactions with those things?
I mean, there's lots more. We'll talk about that in a bit, because the question becomes what's that doing to us, and of course nobody really knows the answer yet. We definitely know that technology will be shaping our brains. Everything we do shapes our brain. That's now very clear. So absolutely clear that technology will be shaping our brain. We just don't. There's a lot of controversy about how that is. But I wanted to move on to what do you call it? Super. What is it?
Super stimulation. Yeah,
That's it,
that is
stimulation.
my own coinage. That's standard psychological fare. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was really, I mean, I want to talk quite a bit about super stimulation, because I think that is very, very important. I want to talk about. I thought it'd be good to talk about your Beatles first.
Oh yeah.
Because I think it's a really good in the book. A really good. It gives you a real sense of the issue that really faces everybody now in super stimulation.
Yeah, well, in fact, so just to sort of backtrack slightly, hyper availability of information is a kind of super stimulation too.
Right,
so
yeah.
you know, our brains give us a reward when we find out something new, and so a super stimulus is an exaggerated form of a stimulus which our brains will naturally be rewarding us for. And so the example of the jewel beetle is, yes, in a way, it's a kind of tragic one. So these male jewel beetles are in the Australian wilderness, and there were some scientists, I think in the early part of the last decade, were like, what's going on with these male jewel beetles? They're just crowding around these discarded like stubbies, you know, sort of discarded beer bottles, which are kind of brown, they're sort of regularly dimpled. And it turns out, well, they're very similar in appearance to the female jewel beetle, and except they're like the most attractive female jewel beetle these male jewel beetles have ever seen, and so they're drawn even to the point of, you know, starvation, being burned alive in the sun, by, you know, they're the super stimulus that is this discarded stubby. Yeah, and what I do in the book is I compare that to pornography. Yeah, I compare that and talk, yeah, quite personally about my own difficulties with porn, with internet porn, particularly in my early 20s. So it's like there's a direct comparison there, you know, between the jewel beetle and my own experience. I'm sure, you know, it's not just porn. It could be shopping, it could be dating, it could be news. Like there's the internet sort of creates a realm of plenty of super stimuli. That's just sort of part of its logic. Yeah.
I mean, again, that's one of the really striking things about the book is, you know, we're going into choppy areas here, but, you know, how much you talk about pornography, online pornography, how much that's now, you know, the hyper availability of that, the fast downloading of that, you know. It used to be a thing that you'd have to get from a magazine from a store. You know, I come from a small town. That would mean buying it off somebody who knew my mother, you know, so that ruled that out very straightforwardly. You know, we've gone from that to, you know, then images that you could download that took ages. Now, you know, I mean, that's one of my concerns about, and everybody's concerns about. Technology is the availability of pornography. I believe now that many young boys are addicted by the age of 10, because of course it's only ever a click away, and I've known people who are addicted to that. I don't know whether you talk very personally about it, and I hadn't asked you whether you were happy. I changed my mind. I told you I changed my mind when we talked about it. But it'd be good. You talk very personally about that, and it is obviously extremely. What would you say? Well, it's a. Anyway, why don't you start with a little bit of your own personal story about that? Because it's quite a strong section in the book, is the whole exploration of online pornography, really.
Yeah. I mean, so what can I say? There was a point, during my degree where some of the people in this call even were present in this house that I was living in at the time. We were living out of college. The college network administrator at the time was very strict. So, you know, the idea of downloading any illicit material at all was like, you know, you'd show up in his office and there'd just be these banks of screens, you know, it's like the Matrix or something, and seeing everything that's going through the college network. And so, I moved to live out along the Cowley Road in Oxford. And suddenly it was like, oh yeah, well, I've got a laptop, I've got a broadband internet connection, I can look at whatever I like. Yeah. And with the door closed, actually no one knows that's what's going on. Yeah.
Mm.
And yeah, I mean, at the time, I was in my third year of my degree. I was finding that really difficult. I was finding, it's a challenge, to particularly the kind of math side of the maths and philosophy combo. I was finding it very difficult. It's very kind of abstract as well. And so yeah, I discovered the bounty of online pornography on a broadband medium, and just kind of got sucked into it. I ended up sort of using it quite, I say using, like watching it mostly, just quite sort of compulsively even. And it was a sad time. I think one of the things I realized in retrospect was how the exposure to that super stimulus actually dulled my experience more generally. Had a kind of quality of just dialing down the sort of beauty and richness of my ordinary sensory experience. I mean, the story's kind of got a bit of there's a few twists and turns in it. I moved back into university accommodation, network administrator guy, and then I was like, I'm not going to be able to watch this stuff anymore, because what's going to happen. I was just kind of scared of that. A bit like the shop owner knows your mum. Well, the network administrator, I guess, sort of knows my mum as well. So I was, or at least could do something. I don't know what. I was fearful of it, and so I just kind of cut it off. And so then I went through a period of about 10 years or so where I was just kind of I wasn't watching any porn at all. I was starting to get much more into meditation, and it was going a lot more smoothly. In fact, meditation particularly was enhanced by the fact that I wasn't exposing myself to this super stimuli, or these super stimuli. But I also realised that there was something not quite right there too, and maybe I'll just leave that for people to read about in the book. But there was another transition or two that took place after that.
I mean, it's one of the striking things about the book. Do read it, because it's the most in-depth discussion I've read about pornography. The easiest thing is just to condemn it, and of course there is lots and lots of things to condemn. But does that actually change anything? Is the question. I think, isn't the pornography industry bigger than Hollywood? Something like that. I believe that everything you typed into a search engine would bring up pornography if it wasn't already managed by Google. So it's a massive issue. But one of the things that's striking about the book is that you explore it from quite a lot of different perspectives. I thought, there's a lot of perspectives in it that's in the book, and I don't want to sort of take too much of that away, because I do want people to read it. But one of the areas it might be worth just touching on is one of the things that you explore is the effect on the user. Traditionally, the users of pornography have been men, particularly young men. It's increasingly becoming women. You were talking about the Pope being concerned about nuns watching pornography. A recent thing from the Pope. Anyway, but it'd be good to just touch a bit on your perceptions of the effects on the user.
Yeah, well, I've mentioned a bit about that already, actually. But I think the thing with the Pope that's interesting is, because he recently, I think it was last week, was asked about pornography, and he said, well, yeah, priests and nuns do it, and they shouldn't. And he talks about it in terms of, sort of good Roman Catholic language, and that's sort of fine in its own way. But I think the interesting question that he missed there was, well, why is it that people who've taken a vow of celibacy, a lifelong vow of celibacy, perhaps done so from a position of idealism relatively early on in life, why is it that they feel drawn to it? What does that say about the Roman Catholic sort of teaching around sex, or and I think that's a kind of more general principle in relation to our discussions around pornography. Is a lot of the work is often done by our underlying views about what sex is, and yeah, that kind of is it something sacred? Is it something inherently problematic? Is it just fun? Is it there's all sorts of ways of talking about sex, and that applies to pornography as well. Yeah, but no, my approach in the book is mostly to talk about the effect on the user. I do think it's worth saying that I talk about the effect on the people who produce it, the partners of users as well. And I think that there are valid ethical questions around all of that. But I'm particularly interested in the ethics from the user's perspective because, well, firstly, I don't think anyone really has gone into that from a Buddhist perspective before. I think actually this is unprecedented from a Buddhist angle. But also, that's what those of us who are watching pornography or have watched pornography, like that's the angle that you're coming from.
Here, of course.
Yeah. Well, who knows? Maybe there are some people who occasionally or have in the past. But I think that's the angle that there's more potential for sort of development of, rather than it being a kind of external prohibition on something, a bit more of an internal exploration of, well, what's going on? What am I bringing to this? What am I expecting from this? And is it giving me that, or is it not giving me that?
I mean, we'll move on now because you can talk about this sort of thing too much, but you do devote a good section of the book to the whole area of internet pornography, and I do think it's important. It's a very, very important area to think about clearly and thoughtfully, and I think you've really done that in the book. So I was very struck by that. But let's go on to the Facebook Sutra. This new sutra you've discovered. So tell us a bit about the Facebook Sutra.
Yeah. So the origins of this go back to maybe 2017, something like that, where I won't go into all the details, but within the Buddhist community that you and I are part of, there was some pretty heated discussion going on around that time. And some of it was extremely necessary, valid, and so on. But it was heated and at times pretty acrimonious. In fact, at times it was pretty ugly, I would say. And so there was me. I was recently ordained into this community. I was sort of looking at people that I should be kind of looking up to, and thinking, gosh, what's going on with the communication here? The way that I'm witnessing people using social media doesn't feel very Buddhist to me. And I also felt like, well, I couldn't just produce another little blue text box. Well, I could do, but it probably wouldn't make very much difference. It would just be another comment in a stream of comments, and probably one that was quite moralistic and judgmental and so on. So I was thinking, okay, well, what might be a way of starting to address the way we communicate on social media from a Buddhist angle? And I thought, well, I'll do what the phase of Buddhism known as the Mahayana has done historically. I'll put words into the mouth of the Buddha. So that's what I did. I wrote a sutta. I call it the Facebook Sutta, and it's all about the Buddha kind of encountering a dispute on the monk Facebook group. And this is what he says, and he kind of gives this teaching. And then the rest of the book, it's about half of the book of Cyberloka, is a kind of commentary, like a scriptural commentary on words that I put into the mouth of the Buddha. So let me just be completely open about that. Yeah, I made up that sutta. It's not a discovery. It's a total, yeah.
And you are going to slip it into the Pali Canon, and eventually think that's unusual that the Buddha's talking about Facebook.
Yeah.
But there's some very, very, this is a massive issue going. I mean, it's a massive issue now. It's a massive issue going forward. This is it's affecting politics. I too, at that time, was very distressed by some of the conversations that I was seeing online between particularly ordained Buddhists, which because what I would hope from an ordained Buddhist community is an example of how to do really good social media conversations, because it must be possibly. Although one of the things that you do in the book is, I think quite rightly, is question what kind of communication is appropriate for what kind of subject. I just had somebody on Facebook ask me a question that was rather unpleasant, and it's clearly not a place for me to respond to that. But yes, I too was very struck by sometimes really very unpleasant, I thought, conversations online. And that sort of sense of, I don't want to be part of a community that does that. I don't want to play a part of it myself if I can help it. Although everyone's sent an email that they shouldn't have sent, probably. I have, and I'm sure other people have. It's just so, nowadays, it's just so easy to do it, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I wonder whether you could say a little bit about, I don't know, where would you start with this almost? It's, as you say, it's about half of the book. Let's perhaps start with, broadcasting your own. Suddenly you've got this unprecedented potential to broadcast your own feelings and thoughts. And you were talking about the emotions are infective online. Let's perhaps talk about that a bit. Much to talk about this because it's such a big section of the book.
I think I might take a step back from that actually,
okay,
and just say, well, there's like a central part of Buddhist teaching is the fact that our minds condition our experience. Yeah, so experiences are preceded by mind, led by mind, and produced by mind. And so when we're starting to think about how we spaces for discussion, spaces for communication online, a lot of the work that's creating that space is being done by the mind that we're bringing to it. So a large part of the reflections that I encourage in the reader is trying to sort of get a handle on what kind of mind am I in now, and how is that going to be reflected in the way I'm communicating, because it will come through, So I don't know whether you've encountered this where someone writes you a very, very polite email, and it's sort of the politeness almost betrays the seething anger underneath it, So it's funny how you can't even hide that. The mental state that we bring, or the mind that we bring to bear on our online communication, and it's true of our communication more generally, but sort of like curiously true, even just of 160 character texts, like that will have an effect. It will, and actually, this is where I do invoke studies. Maitreyabandhu, where they've done they've done studies on Facebook, not a very ethical study on Facebook. They've done a study on Twitter as well, where they've tracked the effect of people's posts and what they call the valence. I think it's the valency or something like that. Whether it's positive or negative, and then what those people go on to do, or the people who witness that go on to do. And it's quite sort of sobering to think that if I'm in a bit of a mood, I type something out on Instagram. I don't know how many, I'm not going to flatter myself with how many people would see it, but, a modest number of people might see it. And then, well, that's sort of with them. They thought I was a nice guy or whatever. And then I've sounded off, and suddenly there's a contagion there. There's an emotional contagion. That's what the psychologists call it, which spreads. So yeah, it is quite, like, surprisingly for me, sobering to think about the effect of that, and yeah, it raises the bar of our kind of self-awareness when it comes to communication.
It effectively creates new kinds of Buddhist practice, doesn't it? It's one of the things that you're exploring in this book is a new kinds of Buddhist practice. That's why you have to create a sutra, because of course the Buddha wouldn't ever have even imagined this world. Yeah,
it's so one of the key reflections that the Buddha is always getting us to do is around conditionality. What gives rise to what, or what arises in dependence upon what, and yeah, that's what we've got to try to understand. So what's brought us to the point even where we're responding to this message, or thinking of writing a message. There's technological preconditions, there's our emotional preconditions, there's even our views. There's the sort of notification settings. There's all this stuff going on in the run up to it, and then afterwards, it's okay. Well, how do I set up conditions so that what I say, what I communicate, actually benefits people? Because that's what I want. That's what I want in my life. Is to benefit people rather than give them a bad day.
Yeah, indeed. So we're moving to not quite the end, but near the end. I wanted to ask another thing that I've been wondering about, which is, well, there is a mounting concern, isn't there, about completely obviously, and about social media, about about there's more and more concern about who owns your mind, for instance, who owns your attention. Your attention is now becoming a resource that's being mined exhaustively, like fracked almost, by people who want to sell you things. I mean, I was wondering about buying a certain bag, and now all I see is bags appearing on my feed. Your attention is now massively being sought, isn't it, by all sorts of people who are very good at doing that and very good at taking your attention off you. So there's more and more concern about it. I remember that I was watching that Netflix, was it a documentary? What was it called? The Social Contract?
Social Dilemma.
That's right, yeah. Which was very striking and very, very worrying. Like one of the creators, I think, of, was it Facebook or something, he was saying, well, what it's doing is it's helping polarize people. Because if you're on the right, you'll be fed things on the right that agree with your opinions, and that'll tend to push you further to the right. If you're on the left, you'll be fed things that foster your opinions, and that'll push you further to the left, and it'll demonize the right. And he was asked, well, where's that going? And he was saying civil war. One of the frightening things about that program is that it's increasing our capacity to be in conflict with each other. And I think I've seen that to some degree within our movement and order in a smaller way. So what, there's more concern about that. There's a book out called The Shallows about how social media is changing your mind. There's a more and more thought that it's pushing you to the surface of your mind and breaking your mind up in ways that we still don't quite understand. There's some evidence that shows that children who play violent video games are more likely to go into violent behavior outside of that. As for instance, squaddies learn on video games. And then people who make those games, support people to make sure to do studies that show that isn't the case. We still don't really know. So there's lots of mounting concerns about this, and your book comes out in the midst of that, in a way, with the Pope making a pronouncement on one side, and then the social contract on what did I get?
Dilemma.
Social Dilemma, that's right. Social Dilemma on Netflix, which I know many people I know have watched. What is, what's your kind of particular contribution to that mounting concern? What, perhaps your critique, your contribution to that mounting concern?
Yeah, well, I think it's real. I think, objectively speaking, if we wish to be on digital, digital devices, on social media, actually, that is a challenge. And I think we've just got to face up to the fact that that will challenge us. And and there are all kinds of sort of technological ways of mitigating that, which I don't really go into in the book because you can find them online. Yeah. But I think I think my distinctive contribution to this is to do with the nature of mind, or it's the nature, the sort of conception of mind that I'm bringing to this, and I'm bringing because of a Buddhist perspective. So what I see from many of the kind of more vocal critics of social media and so on is it's almost like their view of the mind is that the mind is a kind of computer. It's a basic kind of input-output process thing. Feed in this kind of input, and then this particular output predictably comes out. And it's not like that isn't true. It's not like there isn't some truth to that. But I think if you kind of expand from that, if you sort of see that as your basic philosophy of mind, I think that's a fatalistic approach to encountering technology. Yeah, a Buddhist approach, and I think I've benefited enormously from seeing this particular approach, is that minds create worlds. Yeah. So yes, there is this objective challenge, there is this objective situation, but whether that situation is a heaven or whether it's a hell actually depends upon our minds. It depends upon the extent to which we are, bringing warmth, empathy, imagination, clear thinking, that sort of thing to bear on it. And I do believe that it requires training, like serious training, in order to be able to bring those qualities into our digital experience. But I don't think that's insurmountable, actually. And I think in my own experience, I've I've made some massive strides in that, and I've seen other people who do that too. Some really, like, I have to just say this, like, within our community, there are some fantastic online communicators.
That's true.
People who really use these media ever so skillfully, you know, much more skillfully than me. So I'm aware that you know, probably the sort of thing I'm talking about is like, you know, somebody who's an athletics equivalent to this would be like someone who's looking to run a sub 4-hour marathon. Like, it's that kind of challenge. Yeah. It's not to be scoffed at. You know, if you're just sort of the average person, you think, oh, I'll run a sub 4-hour marathon, and you try it without any training, you know, good luck to you. But I think there are trainings that we can undertake, which mean that actually we're able to see the downsides. We're not naive about the downsides, and we can use them to propagate, you know, wisdom, you know, enjoyment, genuine communication with other people. And that's what this book is for. That's who my sort of target audience is for Cyberloka. It's the people who are up for the challenge, who wish to train their minds, to submit their own mental experience to their own awareness, and want to be of benefit. And I think they can. I think we can.
I mean, that does strike me as a genuinely distinctive approach, because we don't want just sort of doom. That won't help either. You know, just sort of weirdly, it just makes people give up on the whole question. Yeah. So in a way, that your book, I think, is trying to be even-handed and optimistic without saying there aren't real challenges. Like I can't imagine myself doing a 4-hour marathon. I think I can imagine doing one with like lots of coffee breaks where you walk. Anyway, like over a week. I thought we'd finish though. We're near to the end of time, but I do think it's important to think about your distinctive emphasis, and it's great that you talked about it. But I want to finish with some practicals, because, you know, I personally, I am concerned about where this is going. You know, I've got 2 teenage daughters, you know, 15 and 16, who, you know, have probably had their phone since they were in a pram, almost, not quite, but nearly. You know, if you're 15, 16, 17, you know, what 3 things would you say, here's 3 things you can do to help you with this challenge of going from being sucked into social media? I mean, just wasting time is the least of it. How can I start to take ownership of my mind, take ownership of my life, not have my mind fracked by media companies all the time? And what have you got 3 like things that they could do like this week?
Yeah, I'll give it a go. So I'm really indebted to my friend Vilasamuni for this one that first comes to my mind, which is I think at some point he said he undertook a practice where whenever he went to his phone, he'd say out loud why, you know, he'd say something out loud. And I think a really simple thing you can say when you reach for your phone is, I'm feeling, and then fill in the gap. Like, I'm feeling tired, I'm feeling grumpy, I'm feeling nervous about my interview with Maitreyabandhu. You know, I'm feeling relaxed, I'm feeling contented, I'm feeling joyful. So something like that. It's establishing a habit of just saying out loud, like, I'm feeling great. Okay, I'm going to go on Instagram. Or, you know, it's something which grounds you, or grounds us emotionally, before then engaging. And actually, okay, well, what will happen then? You know, I'm feeling tired. All right, I'm going to look at my Facebook feed. Well, then what does that translate into? You know, so that's an area of awareness we can bring in there. So that'd be the first thing. Yeah, just sort of tying this I'm feeling with the reaching for the phone. And actually being on social media, like, I'd love to see more kind of positive posts. So like, and something you could do this week would be just thank someone, publicly thank someone. You know, say what it is that you benefited from them. Say how that's affected you. And it's lovely to get that, isn't it? Like unsolicited thanks or rejoicing. It's just like that's sort of paradigmatic, positive communication.
And deeply Buddhist.
And very Buddhist as well. Yeah, well, in a way, it's like human at its best as well, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And then probably the third thing would be, asking for recommendations. So this is more kind of going into the hyperavailability topic, like finding the wisest person you know and asking them what they'd recommend you watch to become wise like them. Yeah, I mean, I've done this with people and just benefited so much from that. Yeah, it just sort of pare down the options. Okay, I'm gonna watch that then. Brilliant. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you very much, Prajnaketu. I'd love to talk to you more, but we've run out of time. But it's really great just to end with those three things. Those are all things we can all do this week. We can all be thanking Prajnaketu, for instance, for this book.
Thank you, Maitreyabandhu.
And yeah, do get a copy. There it is, a very beautiful book. Very beautiful. And as I said, we've only just sort of really touched on so many of the themes. And one of the things that strikes me most about the book is its even-handedness, its unwillingness to sort of just throw its hands up in worry, but to think about things and to then think how we can actually help with those things. And it's very much needed, we, all of us, need to think about this world, because this is a world we're moving into more and more. All of us need to think about it. So I wanted to thank you, Prajnaketu, very much for writing it, and I hope that you'll all read it. Yeah. So thank you very much, Prajnaketu. I'm going to hand you back now to Dharmamegha.
Thank you, Maitreyabandhu. Thank you.
Thanks, Maitreyabandhu, and go well with the rest of your community night. And
yes, I'm on my community night, so I have to go. I did the cleaning earlier on, but I need to go and rejoice in someone, would you believe, and eat. Okay.
Excellent.
So see you later.
Thanks, Maitreyabandhu.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Yeah, and thank you, Prajnaketu, for that conversation and sort of laying out some of the themes together of the book and some of the ways that you approach it. And we've got some really interesting responses and feedback and questions along the way. So if you've still got a question to ask, please type it in the chat box and I'll look after it. But there's I'll just jump in, shall I, with some questions?
Yeah.
And actually, there's one question that came from two people, Jayadi on YouTube, who said, around hyper availability, do you touch on the expectation for individuals to be hyper available due to the online world? They expect that we should respond immediately, for example, to messages. And Phil asked something very similar. So I'll put the two questions together and see what you make of it.
Yeah. Well, the short answer is no, not really, or at least not in that part of the book. Yeah, it's much more kind of social media kind of question rather than the availability. So the way the book is structured is it starts off with thinking more in terms of being a consumer of the internet, and then it turns into being a kind of creator and a participant in it. So the bit about hyper-availability is more to do with consumption, but it's a totally valid point. Yeah, I mean, goodness, I've tweaked a lot of settings on my social media to avoid things like, people knowing how long it's been since I was last online and stuff like that. Because I feel a pressure. I feel a pressure to be responding as soon as I can, or to not to leave a message kind of hanging. It is one of those things. I'd be curious to know what you think about this, Dharmamegha. But like, that's mostly the way I've approached it. Is just, I've got automatic on my phone. I've got automatic do not disturb things that come on at certain times of the day, so I don't receive notifications during that time. Yeah. It probably means that I get less spontaneous communication coming through as a result. But then my life just feels a bit simpler as well. So there are periods of the day when I'm available, and then there's other periods when I'm not. And I guess it's just, I
think it is very true using those mechanisms. So, for example, just one that came to mind in my own life was I don't have my work email on my phone. So at least I try and create some degree of some small degree of separation, so that when I'm not working, for example. But as you say, there's a range of them. I mean, Phil is sort of speaking in the same theme, and he he's talking about sort of what he called the hyper availability of each other.
Yeah.
And the sort of tendency amongst some to expect an immediate response, and that seems more prevalent amongst the younger generation, who might get anxious if they don't get a reply straight away or within an hour. Yeah, and do you have any thoughts on that? I'm also thinking a little bit about, for example, when someone posts something, that sort of slightly addictive thing of waiting to see how many likes on your latest photograph on Instagram there's going to be, for example.
Yeah, and then the next time there's more likes, and then the next time there's no likes.
Yeah,
it's like, oh, yeah. So I mean, I'm not sure I've got any particular pearls of wisdom around that. I think one of the things, though, is that some of this training that I'm describing may court unpopularity. It may not be what our friends want us to do, but I also think, if they're our friends, they'll sort of understand as well.
Yeah. There's an extension of it in I'm not sure who actually wrote it. It's from Abirati community in Nottingham, so I'm not sure who the named person would be, but could you say a bit more about the idea of hyper availability of self in a working context, being expected to answer emails out of hours and that sort of thing?
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, I mean, I just try not to do that. I don't know how. It depends on what your working situation is, I suppose. Yeah, it's well, I suppose the kind of zooming out, the area of this is around sort of boundary setting, isn't it? For want of a better expression. And sometimes it's just a question of being clear as much to other people as to ourselves about what those boundaries are. I really like away messages, but most recently, or not the most recent time, but a time before the most recent time, I set an away message and I fudged it. I fudged it, so I said, I might be slow to get back to you, but actually I should have said, no, I'm not going to get back to you. Don't expect a response. But it was sort of on my mind, and I would have loved to have been more present in the retreat setting that I was in. But actually, I wasn't able to be because of that. And I think because of that, then people also were sort of expecting me to be there. And because of the strength of our social conditioning, we want to meet people's expectations. So there is, I think it's an ongoing question that I don't think we've completely resolved as a society as to how we respect other people's sort of boundaries around those things.
It does make me think most of us currently here on this call, at least, I don't know about the people who'll be watching this afterwards, are part of a community where in a way we have the freedom to create a culture between us that does take the nature of our mind and the forces that are involved in online communication and digital technology seriously. So maybe we could also be explicit and bold in our Sangha creation about this exact thing, and not just falling into a hyper availability or the expectation of other people's availability. So we've got another question from Phil, which he says, in hyperstimulation, do you also consider gaming and watching videos such as Netflix? That's the question. Like, are those two things that you consider?
Oh yeah, I mean, so all of that stuff would fall under the heading of superstimulation. Yeah, so anything that gives an exaggerated form of, and even like the object that is a smartphone is a super stimulator, because it's bright, it's colourful, it's got moving bits that change, lots of red when they want you to do something. That's a super stimulator as well. I mean, actually, I don't go into those particular examples in the book. Like my main thing with that chapter is to talk about pornography, because I don't think it's been talked about to anywhere near the depth that it needs to be. but it all applies, just make appropriate changes. So whatever it is for you, if it's your smartphone, if it's Netflix, if it's YouTube, you can apply the kind of ideas that I'm describing in that chapter to them. Yeah, just almost straight out of the box. Yeah.
I mean, I happen to have read the book a number of times, luckily me. One of the things that you do in there is basically talk about Buddhist approaches to pleasure. Yeah. So sort of porn might be the content around this, but you try and create a broader framework for thinking about pleasure. Yeah. Maybe you could say a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, we want pleasure, don't we?
To all of these things, box sets or gaming or swiping left and right on Tinder or whatever it is,
Right. Yeah, well, we're pleasure-seeking animals, and I think one of the most attractive things for me about the Buddhist path is, like, the Buddha talks about pleasure, and he says, look, pleasure's a good thing. We want to have more and better kinds of pleasure, and he's almost saying in places it's a bit like, oh, you thought that was good, well, you should try this, but the emphasis is much more towards pleasure that actually satisfies us, the pleasure that doesn't increase our craving, pleasure which is sort of longer lasting, more satisfying. So I think that's sort of what that's in a way the bigger question that I'm tackling in that chapter is, how do we learn to tease apart pleasure which embroils us in cyclical, repetitive, even addictive patterns, and those kind of pleasures which actually start to open up our lives and start to give us a kind of, well, like what we deeply want, really, the kind of deeper satisfaction that we're probably seeking in those other forms. So yeah, it's very much about trying to contextualize our internet or approach to pleasure online within a path to better and like more enjoyable kinds of pleasure.
Yeah. There's one little line, you might have to correct me for the exact wording, but you say that perhaps the most contentious thing you say in the book is that there are better pleasures than sex. But you're talking about that in more general terms, isn't there? There's a life of meaning and meaningful activity, and the pleasures, obviously, even of the body in meditation, are refined and beautiful and have their own logic that doesn't cause these secondary problems.
Yeah, and I think actually that to the extent that we are able to access those kinds of pleasure, the other stuff just doesn't sort of feature so much. It's like you think, oh, well, why would I? It's not like I'm having to sort of forcibly abstain from those things anymore. It's like I'm moving towards a vision of a life of just better pleasure. And I think that's necessary. That's another reason why just a sort of moralistic prohibition on something doesn't work, because there's the absence of something to move towards. And I believe, I'm not at all an expert in the psychology of addiction, but I believe that is a key element in overcoming addictions of all kinds, is a positive vision of what one's life can be. Yeah, that's very much the way I'm talking about it now.
Padma Kumara, who's on YouTube, has asked the question: in what ways does internet-based digital activity, and I think by this means sort of social media and that kind of activity, compare to desktop-based digital activity? And he was giving examples of, I don't know, writing a book or doing a program for the Buddhist Center or producing a video or something like that. Like, is it the fact that you're doing something at a computer that's at issue, or is there something else that's at issue?
Well, so within my own story, and I believe my brother is on this call as well. We had a computer that was offline for a number of years. Well, it never kind of made it online, I don't think. Maybe towards the end of its life, but we were playing video games offline for years and years and years, and I don't know whether they were kind of addictive in the same kind of way that the online multiplayer games are. Maybe that's another level of stimulation involved. But yeah, I mean, with like gaming's a particular example. I don't know. I when I'm writing, I generally have all notifications turned off. Nothing's getting through to me. I could be in was it like a Faraday cage or something, and there's no chance of any distraction. And I think that's totally fine. I don't really see the difference between that and writing on a notepad. Or I mean, there are differences in the kind of embodied nature of it, perhaps. But yeah, I don't think there's yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's a whole area, isn't there, about embodiment, isn't it? Like what virtual versus a virtual environment, and the kind of super stimulation that both has an effect on the body, but also obviously takes us out of a kind of direct sense experience a lot of the time as well. That's definitely part of the
well that's interesting, because it's not, it's like the senses are stimulated there. So particularly our eyes and our index fingers are doing a lot of work often, but it's the broader sense of the body, of our posture, even of the kind of the sense of our body in relation to other objects, other people, smells, tastes, other kinds of tangible senses. They're all of that is it's definitely dialed down, isn't it, when we're on our phones or our devices. And I do think that's part of the training, or at least bringing an awareness to the broader sensory experience is part of the training for being able to engage on our devices in a helpful way. If we lack that, it becomes very difficult for us to judge. Actually, when I say pick up your phone and I'm feeling, it's quite difficult to do that if you don't have an awareness of your body already. So part of the training is developing that broader awareness, definitely.
We've got a couple of new questions coming in. From Melanie, do you also talk about old-fashioned manners in the book? Like when people are staring at their smartphones even when they seem to be physically present with you, and the way in this kind of fragmented social behavior seems to be becoming more socially acceptable as well.
Yeah, that's weird, isn't it? That's really weird. Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking yesterday I was walking into town in Oxford, and I was just looking around, and all I could see were the tops of people's heads. It's like, wow, okay. So I'm sort of dodging these folks they're going through. And that does seem to be socially acceptable in a slightly peculiar way. Even I remember just being very sad one time when I passed a restaurant, and there was this kind of young couple, and they'd obviously made a lot of effort to present themselves well for the other person, and they were just sort of on their phones. They were on a hot date, and they're on their phones with one another. Well, not with one another, presumably with other people. So I mean, I'm not goodness knows how one approaches that in a social situation. If you're in the minority, I think it's very difficult. I think all you can do really is exemplify a way of relating, which is like, hey, I'm here, I'm here in person, you can talk to me. And I think, broadly speaking, people get that, even if they feel a pull. We all feel a pull, don't we, to have our phones on the table. Or so I think one of the good things about I noticed this particularly in Buddhist settings is that we meet at a Sangha night, for example, in Oxford, and I hardly see any phones. There's almost a sort of I don't know. It's not like we've ever stated this explicitly, I don't think, but there's a sort of understanding that, okay, we're going to be trying to engage in as rich a communication with one another now as possible, rich and embodied communication. And I think it's just finding other people who want to do that and spending time with them. And that kind of exemplification does make a difference.
Thank you.
There's a thread. Surya Jina in Berlin.
Hi, Surya Jina.
Yeah. Had a very similar sort of question, which was about somebody in our chapter today said that he put his smartphone in the deepest corner of his room and bought just a phone.
Right.
Is this a solution or too radical? And do you think like smart glasses are the next smartphones? Do you discuss the metaverse in your book? And actually, who was it was saying earlier? Phil was saying he's involved in sort of online learning, and more you're getting these sort of virtual reality environments for that. So maybe there's a sort of next content step that you haven't looked at yet in this book.
Yeah, I mean, I think the same. One of the beauties of the way I treat this stuff is that it's not technology dependent. You know, my central point is, you know, what's the mind that we're bringing to these technologies, and that determines whether it's going to be for the best or for the worst. And so with virtual reality, it's like I can think of probably dozens of ways of that being so helpful. You know, I'm even aware of a study that they've done where they've helped people overcome a fear of heights with VR goggles, for example. You know, and there must be so many ways you can do other kinds of virtual learning using VR. And wouldn't it be better? You know, wouldn't it be even more sort of engaging, you know, as a kind of learning environment. But yeah, like with your friend Surya in your chapter, who's buried his smartphone. Again, it's like, well, where's that coming from? Is it coming from a kind of, you know, care for himself and a desire to lead a fulfilled life, and or is it coming from a sort of contempt towards himself, you know, or an aversion to the smartphone? Because if there's anything like that aversion in there, there's going to be a kickback at some point. You know, I mean, I talk about this in relation to porn in the book in Cyberloka. So you know, you can bury your smartphone, but like the basis of doing that is key as to whether that's going to be a sustainable approach or even like a helpful approach.
Yeah. I think that might be. Oh, here are some more questions. So from Walter in the link, we've got a link to the book. I do hope that you will get a copy for yourself. And a little message from Gina to say everything you're saying is wise, helpful, and honest. I can't wait to read the book for more. And I'm relieved, like Maitreyabandhu, that you're not telling us off. So that's really good. And some of you may not yet know that actually Prajnaketu has written some course material to go with the book, because we're hoping that it wants to start a conversation, isn't it? That's what you're trying to do here, is to bring this kind of way of life and these technologies that are increasingly part of our lives into more or greater awareness. And as you say, bring the nature of the mind, we bring to that into greater awareness. So hopefully there might be a course coming to a centre near you, or you'd like to suggest to people you know who might want to engage with this kind of material, that they contact their local centre to see if the book is going to be, a course is going to be held on that.
Can I just leap in there, Dharmamaker, as well? So it's quite a short book in a certain way, and I think that betrays the possibilities for reflection in it. And so when you mention the course, like the reader isn't going to get everything out of it just by reading it. You're not, the way that I've written the book is very much, these are my experiences, these are my reflections as a stimulus to you reflecting on your own experience, and that's where the change will take place. It's not like you'll just be able to lift wisdom off the pages. Yeah, it's very much an invitation to reflect and to engage in discussion, even with me. You know, talk with me if you know me. I really hope that's the direction it goes in. So with the course, it gives you more of a sustained way of reflecting on these things. So it's not just, oh, I've read that. Yeah.
I think I've just been, we've got from Phil Sadhu to you and Prajnaketu for this long needed and I'm looking forward to the arrival of my copy. So that's
Thanks,
great.
Phil.
I think, just on reflection tonight, I think the thing that I'm reflecting, I have in the top of my mind in a way that I hadn't in previous iterations of the book, is this sort of wish that we take the value of our consciousness and our minds seriously, that we, not in a sort of heavily worthy way, but that we really allow ourselves to enjoy the kind of awareness and the kind of sensibility and the kinds of connections that are possible for us, presumably also as a Sangha.
Yeah.
So I really just want to thank you for all of the work that's gone into the book, and I hope it goes really well for you with the book, and I hope that everybody who reads it, just finds a way of being a little bit freer and more aware. In their relationship with the world.
Well, thank you, Dhammamegha, as well. Because you have worked tremendously hard. You and the team at Windhorse worked tremendously hard on producing this as a book. Like I wasn't an author, I wasn't a writer until you came along. So it's such a I don't know, such an affirmation and even a kind of liberation, actually, to be recognised and to turn what were my reflections into something which maybe benefit more widely. So huge thank you to you, Dhammamegha.
Good. Thank you everybody for joining us in person or online. What I mean by that is in person or on YouTube after the fact. And I hope you all go well. If you want to leave any last messages, please do. But otherwise, thank you very much for coming and being part of this and helping to explore and congratulate Prajnaketu, your book.